Hello, my friends. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I wanted to go ahead and create this video for you. We're going to talk about some very interesting people today, Sigmund Freud and Lawrence Kohlberg, and they're both of their theories. Sometimes people find them controversial, so it'll be interesting to see where you come down on this spectrum. I do want to point out there is a ticket out the door password today, so make sure that you are paying attention for it. Hopefully you will find it quite easily. As always, our vision, mission, and class connect Fab 4, which I know you love ever so much, so I'll move myself down. But what are we looking to do today? We are wanting to consider what motivates people to behave as they do in each of Kohlberg's stages. Kohlberg looked at the theory of moral development, and we want to consider why people act the way they do in each stage, or perhaps what motivates them. We want to think about which of Kohlberg's stages we would find most people in. And we might even want to consider superheroes like Captain America or Iron Man. What stage could they be in and why? I thought that'd just be an interesting thought experiment. And according to Freud, we want to think about what he says is the essence of life and what he says is in conflict with it. And also we want to consider his thoughts on whether or not we are aware of most of our urges and thoughts and why or why not he says that happens. So let's think about Kohlberg, Lawrence Kohlberg, for a moment. He was a gentleman, he was heavily influenced by Jean Piaget. He did believe that children went through stages of development. And he said that the most important factor for understanding where a person is in their stage of development is their moral reasoning. So when we're looking at their development, we have to figure out what stage of moral reasoning are they in to adequately understand how they would make decisions. And he said there's 6 stages of development, but not everybody gets through all 6, according to Kohlberg. So let's find out what those are. The first one he talked about is called pre-conventional level, and this is where everybody starts. And if you can think about a kid who's in early elementary school, and you were to say to them, hey, do you want to do something? What would they probably say to you? I gotta talk to my mom, let me check with my mom, ooh, that could get me in trouble, right? And he said that in pre-conventional stage 1, the fear or the thing that kind of determines whether or not you make a certain decision is external. You're worried about getting in trouble. So if you think you could get in trouble for something, you're probably not going to do it. Okay? So you're obedient because you're worried about getting in trouble. Now think about a kid who's getting older, like 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, maybe 6th grade, somewhere in there. And imagine asking them to do something for you. And they're probably going to want to know what's in it for me, right? That's stage 2. Kohlberg said we move into the stage of instrumental exchange, okay? You want me to do something for you? You got to do something for me, okay? And so you're primarily concerned with what you'll get out of it. Again, very external. If you think you're going to get punishment or you're going to get in trouble, then you're going to work to avoid that punishment or that trouble. But as we grow, we start to think about more than just our parents and our very narrow circle of friends, our teachers, and we begin to think about society as a whole. And it could start out simply with the people in the school, media, maybe a little bit of the laws of the country. And so according to Kohlberg, we move into this conventional level of moral development where we start to think about society's expectations. Think with me, let's say middle school, maybe early high school. And you'll notice a lot of people get worried about how they're going to appear. I don't want to do that. I could look stupid. Oh man, my friends are going to laugh at me if I do that. Or, ooh, if I do that, maybe my friends will laugh and everybody will like me. So I'll act funny for in front of the teacher. This is called the good boy, nice girl stage. We are looking at what the people around us are doing, and we're relying on society and the approval of other people around us to determine whether or not behavior is appropriate. It could be our teachers and our parents still. And maybe we'd act a certain way when our parents aren't around, but when our parents are around, we're perfect angels. I know you guys aren't like that. But that's where stage 3 people are. But according to Kohlberg, we hopefully continue to move on. And we get to stage 4, the law and order stage. Any of you watch the Law and Order show? I always hear the dong dong in my head when I think of this stage. But this is where you're looking at the laws of society. You know, when am I supposed to cross the street? Oh, I need to cross over here. I need to watch for the crosswalk. When am I supposed to do certain things? What are the laws on this? How can I behave? Oh, I'd like to do it, but I can't. That's the law says no. So according to stage 4, the laws of your society or your religious group are more important than pretty much anything else around you. Okay. According to Kohlberg, this is where most people stay. They're going to follow the laws, they're going to be good citizens, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. This is a very good place to be at. But Kohlberg said that some people, not a lot, but some people do move on from stage 4, and they get into the post-conventional level. Now, the post-conventional and the pre-conventional, I've often had students say to me, wait a minute, this one's internalized principles, this one's self-interest, what's the difference? Well, with pre-conventional level, you're worried about whether or not you could get in trouble from an external source. And if you're not going to get in trouble, you'll probably try to get away with it. But if you are, that's going to rule whether or not you do it. With post-conventional, it's internalized. You're not looking at an external source to determine whether or not something's right. Now you're looking inside yourself to make decisions. Now, once you hit stage 5, you're still concerned with the laws of society and the rules, but now you're willing to violate some of those laws and rules if your personal values or your personal opinions allow for it. But here's the difference. You're willing to take the consequences if this gets you in trouble. So, for example, if stealing something from somebody would help a group of people, and it's the right thing to do in your personal opinion, you'll do this, even if it could get you in trouble, and you'll accept your consequences. You're more concerned with what is better for the people around you as well as yourself, society, than you are necessarily the laws. But then there's the last one, stage 6. This is universal principle. And this is where you've pretty much you're only going by your individual ethical principles. You're only going by what is your internal compass, right or wrong. You are willing to accept the consequences. You know that some of the things you might do could get you in trouble or make people, speak badly about you behind your back. You've got that. That doesn't concern you, though. You're going to do what you see as right or wrong, whether or not other people agree with you. So you're not really concerned about the laws. You know what they are, and you know the expectations, but you've chosen not to, for your own various reasons, to follow them. Or you've chosen to follow them because of your own various reasons, not because of what society has told you is right or wrong. So this is a lot to take in. Pause it here if you need to read over this. And then let's move on and talk a little bit about how Kohlberg came to his conclusions. So Kohlberg's method of researching his theory was actually really interesting, and I want to kind of get into it. He told his subjects, if you will, in his experiment, a story. So here's the story he told them. He said that there was a man named Heinz, not because he liked ketchup, but because it's just a popular German last name. So he tells the children that are involved in his study a story. I said experiment, I meant study. Sorry, guys. He said there's this man named Heinz, and he has a wife who's dying from a particular type of cancer. And there is a drug to cure her disease, but the pharmacist who created the drug was selling it at a really high price, and Heinz simply couldn't afford it. So what does he do? Well, he goes to his friends and his family and he says, please, 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 can't you help me out? Can you donate some money? I want to get this for my wife. And he's able to raise half the money. But time's running out. His wife is still sick and he's not going to be able to afford to spend the time raising the next half. So he goes to the pharmacist and he says, look, can I either ask you to reduce the price and accept what I have? Or would you take this as a down payment, give me the drug, and then I'll pay you the rest back over time? Well, the pharmacist is like, dude, do you have any idea how hard I worked on this cure? I mean, I seriously slaved over this thing. I've given up years of my life. No, man, I am not going to give you a price break. You got to pay the same price as everyone else. And Hines is just desperate. So that night, while the pharmacist is away, he breaks into his store, steals the drug, brings it home, and gives it to his wife. So this is the story, and Kohlberg asked some questions, but who was in his study? Well, it was a group of 72 boys from Chicago, and they were aged between 10 to 16 years old. And he asked them at that point in time what they thought of this story, some questions. So he did a cross-sectional study. He got their ideas. So he's got kids from ages 10 to ages 16 answering these thoughts. And if you think about it, a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old, there can be a huge world of difference between the way they think or their moral reasoning. But at the same time, imagine how people think at 10, how they think at 20, how they think at 30. That changes over time. I can tell you that firsthand. So here are the questions that he asked. Number 1, should Hines have stolen the drug? Pretty much the obvious question, right? 2, would it change anything if Hines did not love his wife? So in this scenario, initially we're told that Hines loves his wife, but what if he didn't love her? Would that change your opinion about his choosing to break in? 3, what if the person dying was a stranger? Would that make any difference? Would it somehow look different if he was doing this to help out someone he barely knew? And 4, should the police arrest the pharmacist for murder if the woman died? Now you may be saying, that's silly, but on the one, no, he didn't give the woman cancer, but he does have access to the drug that could save her, and Hines did approach him and try to work something out with him. So this was kind of a question you need to stop and consider, don't just dismiss. Now I have a question for you. Do you notice any potential problems with this study or statistical sample? Take a moment and look it over before we move on. Look at the sample here of who is in it. Look at this story that we tell. Any issues come up for you? Let's find out. All right, there were some pretty big issues that people pointed out when his findings came out. The first one is that his dilemma is so artificial. Who is this man Hines? We don't know this man Hines. Who is his wife? How do we know he loves her? I mean, there's so many things that we're just taking on faith, but this isn't necessarily a real world problem. Next of all, look at the kids he used, ages 10 to 16. What do 10-year-olds or 16-year-olds know about romantic love or getting married or having a family or anything like that? I mean, obviously they have their parents, which is awesome, but what do they understand from themselves? What is their experience with a partner with romantic love? Next, as I mentioned, his research was cross-sectional. But the problem with that is we don't know how these boys' opinions evolved over time, which will be longitudinal. And so later, some psychologists got together, they found 58 of the original participants, and they began to interview them every 3 years and ask them about the story again to see how their opinions changed. And what they discovered was Kohlberg was actually right. This idea he had about how people's morality would progress. They found the same thing happened here. Now, there was one more major issue that garnered a lot of attention, and that is the fact that he only used boys in his study. And so a psychologist named Carol Gilligan stepped forward and said, if you only use men, if you only use male subjects, you only get one-sided opinion on morality. Because women approach morality, she said, differently than men approach morality. Men look at principles of things like law and justice, whereas women look more at compassion and care. And she said, had you done this study with men and women, or boys and girls, you might have had a completely different outcome in your findings. And there's a picture of Carol Gilligan in one of her famous quotes. But Kohlberg, at first he kind of ignored this, but by 1987, which is when he died, he had begun to work to correct the gender bias in his work, and he had acknowledged that, yes, actually men and women do approach morality differently. And it brings up an interesting gender debate. Can ignoring gender present issues with psychological findings? That's an important question to consider in psychology. Do men and women look at things differently? And if so, how much should we take that into account? So that's just something to think about as you study. All right, before we move on to our friend Freud, here is your Mastery Cycle 2, Week 4 ticket out the door, moral development. So here we're going to look at this question. And here is your password. It is ethics, all lowercase with the S, ethics. And so we want to consider each situation here, each description, and figure out if the person is in conventional, pre-conventional, or post-conventional moral development. So this person here, Herbie sees Jessica, a girl he likes, drop her scarf. Jessica has a lot of scarves, but Herbie's grandmother has none. He takes the scarf for his grandmother. Later, when Jessica is upset and asks people about her scarf, Herbie explains what he did and asks Jessica to forgive him. So the question is Herbie doing this out of self-interest? I want it, it's mine, I'm taking it? Is he following the rules of society that would be conventional? Or is he made a decision based on internalized principles, but he's still willing to take the consequences? That would be post-conventional. And survey says, ta-da, it is post-conventional. Because notice he has apologized to Jessica and told her what happened, but he also wanted to make sure his grandmother had a scarf. So he was considering the needs of others, and he felt that in this case the grandmother's need for a scarf was more important than Jessica's need to have her scarf back. All right, next one. Herbie sees Jessica, a girl he likes, drop her scarf. He knows his grandmother would really like the scarf for her birthday, but she'd also be very disappointed if Herbie didn't return the scarf, as would Jessica. So he returns it to Jessica. So again, we have to ask ourselves, is this conventional? Is he following the laws of society and those around him? Or is this pre-conventional, meaning self-interest? He's worried about what he needs. And the correct answer is that it's conventional. And our last one, Herbie sees Jessica, a girl he likes, drop her scarf. He knows his grandmother would really like it, so he takes it without letting Jessica know. Later, when Jessica is upset and asks people about her scarf, Herbie pretends he didn't see it. Well, we can see there he's only concerned about his needs and he doesn't want to get himself in trouble, which would make that pre-conventional. So congratulations, a round of applause if you are able now to start determining the difference between the stages of morality. So now I'm going to jump on to our friend Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud has a theory with three major parts. You'll notice in psychoanalytic, you'll see a lot of three. It's also psychoanalytic, remember, is also the same as psychodynamic. Sometimes it's connected, sometimes it's separated, like here. It just depends on how it was translated. But we're going to look at three major parts. We're going to look at the theory of personality dynamics, basically your levels of consciousness and how they work together. We're going to look at the theory of personality structure. And we're going to look at his theory of psychosexual development. So we got a lot to talk about here with Freud, and there is my meme in case you wanted to get the joke itself. So what are the levels of consciousness that we look at? One is our conscious mind. What's going on right now in your head? Your active mind. When you're having daydreams, when you're experiencing memories, your thoughts. These are all in your conscious mind according to Freud. But we also have what's called the preconscious mind. This is like just below the surface. You know how sometimes an idea nags at you or maybe something pops up and you're like, oh, that's a great idea. This is available memory that we can easily bring into our consciousness and we can retrieve. But then the biggest part of our level of consciousness is our unconscious mind, a part that we're really not even aware of that's at work. It's where our repressed motives and our memories and our emotions are. It's where the things are going on that we're not even aware of. They're just all below the surface. Freud says to trust him. And I like this this picture of, sorry, I wanted to move to the picture here, of the iceberg as the personality. I'm sure you've seen this. And the idea that our id, which is our unconscious mind, is completely below the surface. We're not even aware of it. Our ego, which is our conscious mind, is kind of the part that's in control. And then our superego slips between the conscious and the unconscious. So it's the preconscious part. And it's interesting how these parts work together. So let's talk about that. So according to Freud, we have our instincts and our biological situated in our unconscious mind. As you remember, that is our id. Oops, sorry, I forgot to put the word id in there. Ignore the ego for a second. Stick with me on the id. So this is where we have our original system of personality. This is kind of like our base personality. And this is the part that's very much about pleasure principles. It's immoral. It doesn't care what's right or wrong. It wants what it wants. So you know that situation where sometimes you want to do something, you're like, I want to do it. And you can't because you have to do something else. You're like, but I don't want to. That's the id, according to Freud, rearing its head and saying, I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And I want to do what's fun. According to Freud, the id always wants to have fun. That's what it's mostly about. Now the next part is the ego, and that's the one that's more conscious as in we're aware of it. And the ego is the part of our mind that is our human quality that works on what we call the reality principle. You know, maybe you really want to watch a movie right now, but if you don't finish watching this video, you're not going to be able to study for the test, and you're not going to do well in class. Yeah, you want to watch the movie, but your ego is the one saying, okay, right now we're going to make a decision to watch this video, no matter what else we want to do. We're going to stay focused, we're going to take notes, we're going to pay attention, and later we can watch the video. So the ego is kind of the part of the brain that keeps us moving, keeps us going forward and doing what we're supposed to. And then last but not least, our superego. This is our morality center, according to Freud. This is the part of our brain that tells us what's right and what's wrong. Sorry, I don't know why this is so out of order. I'll try to fix that. But the superego is the part that, like sometimes you want to do something and you're like, oh, but that could probably get me in trouble, or, oh, that's not the right thing to do. That's your superego. And the thing that Freud talked about was if any one of these parts is more in control than the other, it's going to have a really drastic effect on your personality. For example, you know that person who just never seems to be able to say no, and they always do crazy things, and they never seem to have an off switch? Well, Freud would say that person's id is out of control. They do what they want to do when they want to do it. They might be very selfish, or maybe they're just kind of wild and crazy and don't ever seem to know how to behave. Freud would say that's their id is in great control. You might know a person who's very rule driven. We're going to do everything by the book. We're going to do it perfectly. We're not going to stop to have fun because we have to do this instead. I don't care if you've been working for 3 hours, you need to finish this. That's when the ego gets out of control. And then people who are really guilty, like everything, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Oh man, I can't believe that happened. Freud would say that's the superego, that the superego has gotten out of control and is making you either feel really guilty or you can rationalize everything. Well, mom said not to eat the cookies, but she probably didn't realize how hungry I was, and I'm going to eat one after dinner, so I just won't eat one after dinner. I'll eat it now. They can always seem to rationalize everything. So basically, Freud says when one of these gets out of control, it has a drastic effect on your personality. But Freud also said that children go through stages of psychosexual development. And he said there's 5 stages that all children go through, and yes, starting from birth. This is where sometimes people start to get a little with Freud. Because this is a really interesting thing to consider. But one thing I want to point out is sometimes when Freud talks about sexual, he actually used the word sensual. And sensual can also refer to your 5 senses. It can refer to things that come in through your senses. So your id is very hungry for things that come in through your senses. So I want to point this out. So Freud said that our life urge, our fundamental motive in life, is sex and sensuality, getting things in through our senses. He said that all physical pleasure ends up being sexual somehow in nature. And sexuality doesn't belong just to the adult, but also to the child. So he believed that we are constantly, from birth, we are constantly motivated by some kind of sexual nature. So whether we have infantile sexuality as babies, moving up through what we would consider a more, let's say, appropriate sexuality. You can see here, Freud, I'm not saying it's sex, but it's sex. That's kind of what a lot of people think about what he has to say. So Freud, he said that children begin at about birth to 2 years with the oral psychosexual stage. And you've seen children biting on things, sucking on things. He says that this kind of physical stimulation is the oral sexuality, and that if you are not able to resolve this stage, so learn how to explore the world with other parts and become less dependent on your caretaker, then you may have fixations like drinking, overeating, smoking, nail biting, and this could even turn into issues with aggression. So he said that if this is resolved properly, meaning you're able to move on to the next stage with no issues, then you wouldn't have any problems. The next stage is called the anal stage. And I kind of remember this one because 2 to 3 years is about when most children begin to potty train. And so the idea, he said, is that children receive a sexual gratification by controlling their bowels and their bladder. If they feel positively about it and they have a positive experience, they're more likely to potty train more quickly. But if they feel bad or they feel shame because they pee or they poop somewhere they're not supposed to, or they're wearing diapers when the parent says they're not supposed to, this can cause more issues. And he said if there's a fixation, something goes wrong in here, you might be anal retentive, meaning you're overly organized and controlling, or you might become extremely disorganized or even incompetent. The phallic stage, looking at about ages 4 to 6, is where children, according to Freud, begin to notice the difference in genders and recognize that pleasure can be found in their genitalia. So this is kind of an age where, why are boys different from girls, and why do boys have this part and girls have that part? It starts to come up. But then also children begin to realize that genitalia can offer them something pleasurable. And according to Freud, this is where we see an Oedipal or Electra complex. In Oedipal, the boy is sexually attracted to the mom, if you know the story of Oedipus from Greek mythology, or Electra, the girl is sexually attracted to her dad. So the idea really is that you're starting to see the parent of the same sex as competition for the affection of the parent of the opposite sex. Now, according to Freud, then children move into what's called the latency stage, ages 7 to 12 years old. And this is where there's not a whole lot of sexual feeling. It's kind of repressed because children are looking to spend time with their own gender. They want to hang out with their friends. They're more concerned about the external world and the pleasures that they can derive there. If you aren't able to move on past this stage, then you may have issues with social and communication skills. You may lack self-confidence. You may have trouble making friends. And then the stage that we all end up in, according to Freud, starting around the age of 13, is the genital stage, where we begin to recognize that, according to Freud, the opposite sex offers pleasure, and we can get pleasure from our sexual organs as well as the gratification of a partner. Now, I want to point out that this was done about 100 years ago. So, of course, there may be different thinking now, but Freud felt that at that time it was very common to have a heterosexual partnership. So that's why he was fixated on the opposite sex and attraction there. He said people who can't get through this stage are going to have trouble being warm, caring. They're going to be trouble having a well-balanced relationship. They may be too focused on work or too focused on their relationship or too focused on their pet and not able to balance all of that and see it as a whole. So it's a really interesting way to look at life. Again, you might not agree with it at all. You might think it's completely true. Don't dismiss it entirely. I've had some students say, no. And I understand that. It's uncomfortable and weird to talk about. But it is kind of interesting to look at. Some parts of it might be of use. So let's talk about instinct. According to Freud, we are creatures of instinct. And we have two instincts. We have our life instinct, which was known as eros. This is our impulse to live. To live. Sorry, guys. It's where we want the species to survive. It's manifested through love, through sex. This is where we're always pushing forward. When Eros is in control, we have successful, stable lives, and we're always challenging ourselves and moving forward. We have this life-maintaining energy called libido, according to Freud. And when our libido is working properly, we seek pleasure through sexual gratification. But sometimes, according to Freud, the libido can be blocked, and that can cause neuroses or anxieties. Now, the opposite of Eros, the life instinct, is Thanatos, the death instinct. And I always find it hilarious because now that I've watched Guardians of the Galaxy and I think about Thanos, the bad guy, he's very much Thanatos. It's very similar. That's just my little Marvel world instincts there. But this is the desire to die or to destroy. And according to Freud, we have to have both life and death instincts in us because sometimes we have to let things die or we have to walk away from something. But when Thanatos is in control, this can create conflict and anxiety. It can create extreme aggression, cruelty, and it can even lead people to suicide. And he said that we have to have a balance of these life and death instincts. So if we have too much of one or the other, it can really impede our satisfaction of life. We might push ourselves too hard if we have too much life instinct, or we might destroy relationships if we have too much death instinct. Now, Freud was big on what we call defense mechanisms. How do we react in a situation when we're not unhappy? Or when we're not happy, sorry, no, when we're not happy. And you can see there's a large number of them. For example, repression. If something has happened that seems too disturbing or upsetting, the ego could block it and push that way down into the id. Denial. For example, when you are blocking an external event from your awareness, someone who might say, oh, no, the doctors are overblowing it. Smoking's not bad for me. I don't need to worry about that. That can be a form of denial. Projection. When you have sometimes there's a person maybe you don't like or a situation you don't like. You don't really have a good reason for it, but you're just not fond of this person or this thing. But you need a reason, according to Freud, to dislike this person, so you project your thoughts or feelings onto them. So, for example, if you dislike somebody a lot, maybe you hate that person, and you know that it's wrong because your superego's in there going, you shouldn't hate this person, but what if they hated you? So you say, oh, well, I don't like them because they don't like me. Maybe they don't even know you exist, but you've made this decision so that it's acceptable for you to dislike them. And then we have things like displacement, regression. Regression's often seen with small children, like mom brings home a new baby, and let's say the 3.5-year-old who's always been able to potty train suddenly needs to wear diapers and goes backwards in time. So you go backwards in psychological time when faced by distress. Let me go back to displacement for a moment. Sometimes you're frustrated with something. Let's say you're mad at your mom. And you can't yell at your mom or hurt your mom, heaven forbid, but you want to get that stress out. So you go into your room and you punch your pillow or you kick your bed. That's displacement. That's where you take your impulse, such as aggression, and you satisfy it with a substitute object so that it's considered acceptable. Now, sometimes you might take that aggression and you might channel it into something societally acceptable, such as sports. Or maybe like when I'm really mad, I just clean the heck out of whatever's around me. I mean, I just clean my house. That's sublimation. So displacement is where you're taking your anger from one thing to another, but you might not be doing something that's necessarily societally acceptable, like punching your pillow. But sublimation is where what you're doing is considered societally acceptable. So we'll talk more about these defense mechanisms. But, we are finished. What did you guys think? These theories were very revolutionary at the time, and they led to a lot of really interesting treatments. Some worked, some that didn't. But Freud was a really interesting guy if you study study him and study his history. For example, he tried drugs like cocaine as treatments and as recreation for fun. He experimented with a lot of different things. Again, some people look at this and say, oh, I don't think so. Other people look at this and say, wow, that's kind of revolutionary. That's really interesting. Some psychologists choose to completely disregard his work. Others think that there's merit in some parts and not others, and so they pick and choose. It's up to you what you choose to do, but you do need to be aware of psychoanalysis as Freud created it and how it works. All right, my friends. I don't know about you, but my mind feels a little bit blown here, much like this picture. We will be studying more cognitive psychologists in our next class or so. Piaget, who's actually the father of cognitive psychology, Erikson, who created psychosocial development, so he looked at, again, our development in a different way, and Abraham Maslow, who is known as the father of humanism, who created the hierarchy of needs, the idea that we have needs that we need to fulfill, and that actually it started under psychoanalysis and then kind of, or cognitive, and then kind of pulled out and became its own branch. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope I delivered some cool information to you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.